everybody, it's Mike Jeffers, Chicago Jazz Magazine, and welcome to the April 2019 issue of Chicago Jazz Digital Magazine. I'm excited on this feature interview to be able to sit down with the pianist Greg Spero. I mean, this guy's originally from the Chicagoland area. He has toured the world with pop, jazz, and every other artist in between, and he's not exactly an old person, so that's pretty impressive. Greg, I'm glad we caught you when you're in town from LA, and we can sit down for a few minutes and talk to you and have you on the cover, finally, of Chicago Jazz Magazine.
It's cool. I'm not an old person, but I'm a little older today, turning 34.
That's right, it's his birthday.
Yeah.
Wow, man.
Celebratory interview.
Well, you're younger than me, so you win. So, there's so much stuff to talk about. I mean, I love the fact that you play so many different styles. So we could go down that road. I love the fact that you grew up here in Chicago. You were influenced by a lot of different artists, probably in Chicago, among national artists. And then you made your way to LA. You toured with like a superstar pop group for a long time. And now you've got your own projects happening. You've got the Tiny Room, but I think we talked off camera that the name may be changing. But I've seen that all the time. I'm sure a lot of our viewers here on social media have seen that. There's so many creative things happening. But before we go down those roads, why don't we just get a little bit of background on you? You grew up in Chicago. Did you start playing piano as a young child, or is it just something that happened when you got a little older?
There's this photo. One of my favorite photos that I have is when I was about a year old. It's my grandma, and I'm sitting on her lap, on her knee, at the piano, and just banging on the keys. So I don't know when my mom tells me when I was about 3, I was like improvising and working out melodies and things, writing some little. Whatever.
When you were 3?
If you can call it,
a
3-year-old writing stuff. I know they say that about, but yeah, well, I was working out melodies and just hearing things and playing them on the piano when I was about 3.
Well, and your mom plays piano from what I was reading up a little bit on,
She's a classical pianist.
So it's probably something, listening to her play, right? I mean, you hear melodies, and that starts to organically come out of you. Well, obviously, you're not sitting planning out, chord changes when you're 3. Maybe you were. I don't know.
I don't think so. I highly doubt it. But yeah, my mom was a piano teacher.
Okay.
So she still is. And I would hear from when I was a baby. Well, my mom was also a big classical music enthusiast, and I think she even told me that she took like headphones and put it on her stomach when she was pregnant.
It's not that odd, right?
Some
people
do that. The Mozart effect or whatever. Who knows?
That's right.
I read that book. It's kind of a cool book and cool concept, but like really, who knows? But yeah, as I was growing up, I remember I was in the room. We had a small house, and it was in Highland Park, north suburb of Chicago. I had the room upstairs, and my mom taught piano. And I could hear all the piano lessons from my room. So when I was in there, whether it was whatever I was doing, having a play date when I was a toddler or when I was doing homework as a teenager, I could hear my mom's piano lessons as the background to my life growing up.
Oh, interesting.
So I took piano from her for 2 years officially. And then it's hard for a mom to make her son take piano when she's a piano teacher. So I didn't really take formal lessons for too long.
Yeah.
But my entire life growing up, I heard the exercises and I started to play them just by hearing them. So I would go to the piano and work stuff out. And then my dad was in bands. He's a pianist as well. He plays blues and rock, country. And he would play some stuff and I would ask him hey, how'd you do that? And he'd show me. So I'd work that out too. It was always just part of the background of my childhood growing up.
Yeah, it was just you're constantly around that environment. I'm a big believer, and I want to get your take on this too, because, just not talking about that age, but every age. And, now with you playing all these different styles and stuff, don't you think when you're surrounded by something, it osmosisly just kind of gets in your system? I mean, if you're listening to certain things constantly, like for an example, when I was first learning jazz, and maybe this happened to you, everybody always says, you got to listen, you got to listen, you got to listen. Well, okay, you got to listen to hear the chord change. No, you got to listen really to get the feel, I think, initially, right? So, you pick up those osmosis things. That must have been happening to you at such a young age that it was all ingrained in you.
Yes. That's the short answer is yes. But there's a much longer answer to it.
Go right ahead. I was hoping you'd have a longer answer.
Music is one of those things various other art forms that can't be described to its true depth with anything other than itself. So when you talk about you should learn this, you should learn that, and the various ways we have of representing music, whether it's graphically through notation or verbally through description, none of that has any, like, it doesn't begin to describe the breadth of detail and depth that the actual music itself has. That music is a description of us as human beings. It's a description of our emotions. You can transfer emotions from one person to another. You can transfer motivations. Music is the background of movements, and it's used to inspire and invigorate people. I use it for that on a daily basis. So the way that music can be learned to its true depth is only by experiencing it. That's why the people who are the greatest musicians that are in history, like Quincy Jones is a great example. He was able to execute music on the level that he did because he was so immersed in it for his entire life. I mean, from the year of 12 for him. And that's how you're able to express it with such depth.
Well, that's like any art form, right? I mean, we're talking about music, but any art form, when those masters are ingrained in stuff and they're so into it that it's part of them, right? And when you're growing up, it's becoming part of you. And now I do know that you take this stuff on another level of thought process, right? Because I mean, some musicians will sit down and say, "Oh man, whatever. Yeah, here's the 2-5-1 changes. Let's blow through this and we're out of here." But we just sat down. You just sat down and did some improvisation before we started the interview that we're going to run on probably the intro and stuff, but then probably one of the full tunes. And you can tell that when you sat down to play, it was all about what you were about to create, what was about to come out of you, and that's really difficult to explain to somebody that doesn't know how to do that, number one. Number two, how do you even get to that level? Because I always ask people this about intensity, playing with intensity all the time. But I'm going to ask it a little different with you, is that you can't just sit down and get in whatever situation you're in and just calm yourself, and now you're completely into the music. But I've seen you play enough that you could be doing whatever, but when you sit down to play, it's all about what's about to come out. How do you do that?
That's only partially true, actually. Only partially true. I struggle with it daily. Yeah. That's one of the biggest struggles.
That's a difficult thing to do, right? I mean,
yeah, my life is, my entire existence is based around that struggle, actually. And today I didn't do great at it, actually, because there's this we're talking about creativity, and every human being has a pathway into that creative space, no matter what we're doing. It could be any form of art, but not just art, business, thought, the human thought that we can tap into this thing that some people put a name on it, like God, and some people call it the deeper self, the subconscious. And we have various ways of tapping into that. Some people use drugs. Charlie Parker used drugs. Some people use meditation. Herbie Hancock uses meditation. I use meditation because that's what he guided me to use.
It's better than drugs, too.
I mean, the interesting thing is they can accomplish the same end, but one ends your life like 50 years earlier.
There's that, yeah.
And let's use this today as an example. I was playing the piano, and I sat down and I knew that I wasn't in the space to really fully. We create a pathway in our consciousness it's like we have this little droplet of creativity that drops into this river that feeds into an ocean that is the vast potential that we have. as creative beings in every aspect of life. That's how we have the brilliance of society that we have right now, because some people, whether it was the people forming that which became the United States government in the way of trade, and the method of living as a human society that resulted in what we have today in society, that resulted in us having an iPhone that we can call an Uber and get to the jazz
Right.
showcase after this if you don't drive me. And so, like, the brilliance of human creativity spans the breadth of human existence. But what I was trying to tap into there was that same thing that people have tapped into throughout history and throughout artistic history, particularly, is what I relate to. And to get there, I use meditation, but I also use self-control, and that's a Buddhist aspect. Like, you have the monks that go up into the mountains and eat rice and try to eliminate all of their desires so that they can tap into that brilliance of existence, of life, that is beyond the desires. That is, when you can shed them, then you can be present and be there with what some people call God. Even the monks call it God, actually. Even though they don't think of God in the same way that, like, the church believes in God. It's a totally different,
Right.
Like, one is in the self and existence, and one is, like, up here, which there are obviously all the debates that we could have. So I was at a meeting before this for a thing that I actually can't talk about in this interview, but but a really exciting thing that might happen in Chicago at the end of the year. It was my birthday, so they brought cupcakes, and I ate some cupcakes, and I had this intense meeting, and my mind was, like, buzzing on these business logistics and things that figuring this out.
Right.
So getting here, that's why I wanted to go and meditate before the interview for a few minutes, because coming here and sitting down at the piano, I wasn't fully in the ocean. I did not. And, the ocean it's a metaphor. It's a concept. You never really know how deep you are in it, because human potential is infinite. But sitting down at the piano, every time I do, and sometimes I succeed more often than other times, when I sit at the piano, I always try to calm the mind and calm the body and get into that moment where I can sit into that expansive throughput of creativity that then comes out through my instrument, because I've practiced that. That happens to be the medium that it comes out for me on.
Do you practice that? Well, obviously you practice that, but you probably practice that so that you can walk into any situation, whether you're playing tonight at the Jazz Showcase, whether you're playing at Madison Square Garden, whether you're playing whatever, you're touring, you just got off your bus and you're walking in to play a jazz gig. When you're at home, when you're somewhere, you must practice in the same way, right? So you must meditate, you must calm and all that stuff, and then you sit down at the piano so that it's a routine, so that it's a kind of a muscle memory thing, or is it so that you can get into that flow and really start to create?
Muscle memory is a funny thing. It's not muscle memory. Muscle memory actually, can we swear on this, by the way?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, muscle memory fucks a lot of people up. That's the best way I can put it. It takes people down a path of not being creative because they practice vocabulary. And a lot of people, especially I notice being in Los Angeles, because everybody's trying to impress each other, a lot of people ingrain some things in their muscle memory, and they go to the performance and they play those things out of their muscle memory, and then everybody who isn't really paying attention is like, yeah, that was amazing, because that was some virtuosic shit.
Right.
It was great,
right.
But it wasn't creativity. It's a difference. I guess you could call it a facet of muscle memory, just knowing the instrument, but that would be the same. The analogy would be if we're learning a language. You and I are talking right now. We're communicating back and forth. If I had muscle memory, I would come in here and I would just start speaking, and I would know the thing I was going to say. I wouldn't be paying attention to anything you're saying to me, and I would just talk for 40 minutes and say the same thing I said yesterday, and then it'd be done.
You could run for president.
Yeah. Yeah.